Hey guys, it's EJ, and today we're going to take a look at logic. The most important thing to know about logic in Blockpad is that it's basically the same as in conventional spreadsheets like Excel or Google Sheets. So everything you know about using if function or ifs in conventional spreadsheets, you can apply to Blockpad. So with that said, there's kind of two big differences in how the actual formulas work. And the first one is that the comparison operators for testing equals and for testing not equals are different in Blockpad. So a double equal sign for equals and then exclamation point equals for not equals. So I have examples of that down here. The second difference in formulas is that you can chain these comparison operators together in Blockpad like this. So we want B to be between 2 feet and 5 feet. You can't do that in conventional spreadsheets, but we've enabled it in Blockpad because it fits a lot more with doing stuff in engineering. Other than that, all of the basic logic functions like not, and or, it's the same as in spreadsheets, and then same for if function and ifs. I have a couple of examples that I'm going to go through in this video, and those are mostly to show you how the display works for Blockpad and a couple of different formatting options that you've got. Otherwise, in terms of actually doing the math, if and ifs are going to work the same as in spreadsheets. So before we get into the examples, I'm going to show you that if you don't like the way that these math operators are displayed, you can change them in the properties window under math layout. You can change comparison to these more conventional comparison operators. And that's how they're going to be displayed in the math notation. Note that in the formula itself, it's still going to be these comparison operators here, but they're just going to be shown differently. For our first example, I have this really simple if function where we say if R is greater than R critical, return fatigue governs, return yield governs otherwise. And you'll notice that this if function is displayed as a logic table. So the way you would read this is to say return fatigue governs if R is greater than R critical, return yield governs otherwise. So that's kind of how you read it. It's a really just simple example. For a slightly more complex example, we have this nested if function here, which works like nested if functions in conventional spreadsheets. We have if, the condition, what happens if true, and then the next if function, or what happens if false, and so on and so on. And so you can see in our logic table, it'll read as flow type equals laminar if the Reynolds value is between this number, transitional if between here, turbulent, etc. To show you another nested if function, we'll go back to this file up to KB. And this one's a bit more complicated than the previous two. We have return 1 if the load type is axial. Otherwise, we have these formulas here depending on the diameter. So for these longer formulas, I suggest using the visual editor. So I'm going to right click and select visual editor. That brings us up to this window, and there's two benefits to using it this way. One is you can see all of these lines and you can adjust them much more easily than if you were doing it just in the little formula bar while double clicking the equation. So you can see I can come here and change this. It's really easy to see. And then also you can see the changes as you make them. Another benefit is that you can click any part of this equation here and adjust it there. So if I click here, I can change this to out of diameter range. And that's going to change my formula, and that's going to show you the change. I can click OK, and it's going to apply that to this formula here. So that's really all I was going to show with nested if functions. I have another example here using ifs. So this works just like conventional spreadsheets ifs. If I have condition, then the result if it's true. Condition, result if true. Note that this is different than the if function in that there's no result if false. So if none of these conditions are met, Blockpad will return an error. In this particular case, we're not worried about it because this load type input is a dropdown and it's only going to be one of those three options. So we're never going to see an error in practice. So that's a good thing to keep in mind with these if-s functions. Another thing to note about this if-s function is that if you notice, it ends up kind of being like a table where we have bending is 1, axial is 0.85, and you can treat it exactly like that in Blockpad if you prefer. So here, as an example, I have this table where I just have bending is 1, and we can just use a VLOOKUP function instead of an if or if-s function to handle this case. This is especially good if there's a whole lot of conditions like 5 or 10. You don't want to write all of that in an if-s function. It's much easier to manage in a table. So there's one more thing that I want to share with you guys. And in this file, you'll notice this looks like a relatively simple equation, but if I double click it, it actually ends up being this rather large if-s function. And the reason it's showing like this is I'll click on it, and in the math layout property, I have if statements set to show only true parts. If I change this to show all parts, which is the default, it's going to appear as the logic table like in the other examples. Now, so this can be useful if you don't really want to show the logic table. If, for example, you change this to Gable, you don't want to see what happens with monoslope. You only want to see what happens with Gable. And in that case, you can change this to show only true parts. And then it's just going to show the equation that happens that's associated with Gable. So if I change this to monoslope, the actual math that's appearing changes. If you do this, I suggest having some accompanying text that, helps you or anyone reading this realize that there is some logic going on here and it's not just an ordinary equation just like this. So here I have this text and I also have this field that's referencing the roof type. So it'll change when I change the roof type. Okay, that's all I've got for you. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thank you.